The dust of forgotten stars tasted like regret, or so Kalen imagined. For a junior archivist of the Glycon hegemony, imagination was a dangerous, borderline seditious commodity. His reality was the sterile, silent hum of the Grand Archive on Glycon Prime, a planet-sized repository of curated truth where history was not discovered but dispensed. For 30 millennia, the hegemony had been the galaxy's alpha and omega, the lone superpower to have survived the Great Collapse. And its version of the past was the only one that mattered. All other narratives were heresy, scrubbed from the records with the cold, passionless efficiency of a memory wipe. Yet, Kalen spent his nights chasing a ghost, a specter that haunted the corrupted data caches and forbidden sub-networks of the archive. He hunted for whispers of Earth, the Terran mythos. His superiors called it a collection of fables about a species so arrogant they had burned their own star system to ash in a fit of self-immolation. The official record was brief, dismissive, a minor race, technologically precocious but culturally unstable, who vanished from the galactic stage long before the hegemony's rise. But the fragments Kalen found told a different story. They were slivers of poems written in a language of breathtaking complexity, blueprints for impossible machines that seemed to bend physics like a sculptor bends clay, star charts that mapped constellations visible only from a single, lost world. These weren't the relics of savages. They were the echoes of gods. His obsession was a secret he guarded more closely than his own life, a silent rebellion against the gray, orderly universe the hegemony enforced. He shared his quarters with stacks of illicit data slates, his dreams filled with the ghosts of cities whose names he could barely pronounce. His direct superior, Archon Valerius, was a creature of pure hegemony doctrine, a tall, gaunt Glycon whose face seemed permanently fixed in a state of weary disapproval. Valerius viewed history as a series of administrative problems that had, thankfully, already been solved. The past is settled. Kalen. He would often drone, his voice thin as recycled air. Your task is not to question it, but to catalog its corpse. Cease your romanticism. Valerius knew, of course, about Kalen's fascination with the Terran mythos. He saw it as a harmless, if irritating, eccentricity. A less competent archivist would have been reassigned to scrubbing data parasites from planetary census records in the outer fringe. But Kalen was too good at his job. He could navigate the labyrinthine depths of the archive with an instinct that bordered on the supernatural. And so, Valerius tolerated him, watching him with the wary patience of a man waiting for a faulty cog to finally grind itself to a halt. The cog began to wobble on a day that started like any other. A priority alert rippled through the archive's internal network, a low-level tremor of bureaucratic excitement, a deep space listening post in the outer veil, a desolate stretch of void considered utterly barren, had detected an object. The report was flagged for its sheer impossibility. The object was massive, moving under its own power, yet it broadcast no transponder code, matched no known ship configuration, and bore no energy signature the hegemony could recognize. It was a complete unknown, a statistical anomaly in a galaxy that the hegemony believed had been fully mapped, cataloged, and tamed. More perplexing was its signal. It wasn't a hail, not a declaration or a warning. It was a simple, elegant stream of prime numbers, a beacon of pure mathematics that screamed intelligence into the void. It was a message that any spacefaring race would recognize as artificial, a cosmic knock on the door, To the hegemony, however, an uninvited knock was an act of aggression. Kalen saw the report flash across a public terminal, and his blood ran cold. He pulled the raw signal data into his private workspace, his heart hammering against his ribs. The public report included only the prime number sequence, but the deep packet analysis contained the carrier wave's substructure, the digital watermark beneath the message itself. His hands trembled as he ran it through his forbidden translation algorithms, the ones he had painstakingly reconstructed from fragmented Terran linguistic models. The patterns emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. It wasn't just a signal, it was a key, a Rosetta Stone. The structure, the cadence, the mathematical relationships woven into the very fabric of the broadcast, it was all there. It was Old Terran. They were not a myth. And they were here. He bolted from his workstation, data slate clutched in his hand, and burst into Valerius's office without knocking. The Archon looked up from a delicate inscription on a shard of pre-collapsed pottery, his thin lips tightening into a razor line of annoyance. Kalen, your enthusiasm is, as ever, misplaced. Explain this intrusion. Kalen didn't hesitate. The anomaly in the outer veil. Archon. The signal. It's Terran. Old High Terran, to be precise. The linguistic structure is unmistakable. This isn't just an anomaly. It's first contact with a species we believe to be extinct. He pushed the slate onto Valerius's desk, displaying his analysis, the color-coded waveforms, the overlapping syntactical matches. Valerius glanced at the screen for a fraction of a second, his expression one of profound boredom. He waved a dismissive hand. You see your ghost in every shadow. Boy, you have taken a meaningless string of numbers from some rogue probe or stellar phenomenon and twisted it to fit your fantasy. The Terrans are dead. The file is closed. Now get out. You are wasting my time and risking a formal censure for trafficking in prescribed historical narratives. The dismissal was so absolute, so cold. It felt like a physical blow. Kalen stood frozen for a moment, the chasm between what he knew and what the hegemony would admit yawning before him. But, Archon, he stammered, the evidence is a product of your delusion. Valerius cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Leave, now, and delete this fiction. If I see it again, I will have you scrubbing nutrient vats on a penal colony before the next cycle. Defeated, Kalen retreated, the Archon's threat echoing in his ears. He returned to his terminal not to delete his work, but to copy it, burying it deep within an encrypted partition. He knew what the hegemony did with variables it couldn't control. It didn't study them, it sterilized them. And an entire ship of a supposedly extinct mythical race was the greatest variable the galaxy had seen in 30,000 years. His fears were confirmed within hours. The hegemony's response was swift and predictable. They dispatched the 17th Protocol Fleet to the Outer Veil. It was a cleanup crew, a force designed not for diplomacy or exploration, but for containment and neutralization. Its commander was Prefect Lyra, a woman forged in the hegemony's rigid military doctrines. Her record was impeccable, her loyalty absolute, her orders, Kalen knew without having to see them, would be simple: identify, assess, and if the subject cannot be immediately controlled or categorized, eliminate it. He watched the fleet's deployment on the public networks, a silent, grim procession of gray warships sliding into the black. They were scalpels, designed to excise anything that might threaten the sterile perfection of the hegemony's order. As the fleet traveled, Kalen used his high-level access to follow their internal communications, a flagrantly illegal act that could cost him everything. He saw the first visual captures of the vessel. It was a behemoth, larger than any ship in the Glycon Navy, but it wasn't a warship. Its lines were too graceful, its structure designed for a journey of millennia. Not for battle. It was scarred and pitted from its long voyage, trailing a faint plume of leaking radiation. It was an Ark, a lifeboat. The name was just visible on its hull, etched in the elegant, alien script he knew so well, Odyssey. The name itself was a poem, a story of a long, arduous journey home. Then came the first exchange of messages. The protocol fleet hailed the Odyssey, using the mathematical key the humans had so conveniently provided. The translation was clunky at first, but it worked. The voice that came back from the Ark was not that of a conqueror. It was weary, strained, but clear. They identified themselves as the last survivors of the Terran race, the crew and passengers of the colony Ark Odyssey. They were not from this galaxy. They were refugees, fleeing a cataclysm, a horror that had consumed their new home in a distant spiral arm. They had followed ancient star charts, a map of hope leading them back to their ancestral galaxy, to a home they had never known. They requested assistance, medical supplies, and safe harbor to make repairs. They were supplicants, not invaders. Prefect Lyra's official response was cautiously diplomatic, a string of bureaucratic platitudes about galactic law and protocols for undocumented vessels. But Kalen could read the subtext in her reports back to High Command. She was stunned, not by their story, but by their technology. Her ship's deep resonance scans, though struggling to penetrate the Ark's hull, sent back data that was pure heresy to the Glycon way of thinking. The Ark's power source was a contained, stable micro-singularity. It was a tame black hole, a feat of engineering so far beyond the hegemony's understanding that it might as well have been magic. To the Glycons, who had built their entire civilization on the predictable, safe mechanics of hyperfusion, a singularity drive was the ultimate taboo, a power too great, too dangerous, too likely to unravel the fabric of space-time itself. It was forbidden science, a power that the hegemony had executed entire species for even attempting to research. Worse still was the hull. The scans that did manage to get a reading reported an alloy of impossible density and resilience. The Odyssey was a civilian ship, a lifeboat, but it was constructed from materials that made the armor on Lyra's flagship look like parchment. The threat assessment reports began to shift. The humans were peaceful. Yes. They were asking for help. Yes. But the technological disparity was too vast, too terrifying. A species that could build a ship like this, even a non-military one, could build weapons that could shatter worlds with a thought. They were a walking, talking existential threat. The logic of the hegemony was cold and inescapable, a variable that powerful could not be left to chance. It had to be controlled, and if it could not be controlled, it had to be destroyed. Kalen watched the internal memos with a growing sense of dread. The language shifted from first contact to threat mitigation. The fleet began to maneuver, not into a welcoming posture, but into a standard orbital assault pattern. They were going to kill them. They were going to extinguish the last light of a species that had crossed the unimaginable void between galaxies. only to be met with fear and paranoia. They were going to murder the ghost he had spent his life chasing. In that moment, something inside Kalen broke. The quiet, obedient archivist died, and something new, something reckless, was born. He could not stand by and watch this happen. He made copies of everything, the Odyssey's peaceful messages, the scans of its civilian infrastructure, his own research notes providing context on Terran culture, art, and philosophy, all the evidence that these were people, not monsters. With trembling fingers, he composed a message, encrypted it, and sent the entire data package out into the wider galaxy, leaking it to a dozen independent news outlets, academic forums, and even a few notorious anti-hegemony agitators he knew of from the dark nets. It was an act of high treason, a desperate gamble to force the hegemony's hand, to show the galaxy that they were about to commit murder on a cosmic scale. Miles away, in the cold, silent dark of the outer veil, Prefect Lyra gave her final order. A tight beam transmission, for the human captain's ears only, cut through the space between the fleets. The message was stripped of all diplomatic language, its meaning as sharp and deadly as a shard of ice. By the authority of the Glycon hegemony, you are designated an uncontrolled technological variable. Your existence violates the galactic stability protocols. Surrender your vessel and its core technology for immediate containment. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Failure to do so will be interpreted as an act of aggression, and we will respond with neutralizing force. Aboard the bridge of the Odyssey, Captain Eva Rostova watched the Glycon warships align into a perfect, deadly geometry on her view screen. Behind her, through the armored transparency of the bridge, lay the cryodecks, holding the last million souls of humanity. They had fled a ravenous, unknowable enemy that had devoured their galaxy, only to find a new kind of monster here, one that wore the mask of order and reason. She looked at the faces of her bridge crew, seeing their exhaustion, their fear, and the unyielding spark of defiance in their eyes. They had not survived for 50,000 years in the dark to die in the light. She turned back to the view screen, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of all her ancestors. "Communications," she said, her tone devoid of any hope for peace. "Send one message back to the hegemony fleet. We are not a variable. We are humanity. We have come home." She then turned to her tactical officer, the fire of a long slumbering history burning in her gaze. "And wake the children. It seems their sleep is over." All across the great arc, systems that had lain dormant for millennia began to stir. Deep within the ship's spine, conduits designed for geological surveying and asteroid mining began to glow with a terrible, unfamiliar light, rerouting power that could crack a continent. The civilian vessel, the gentle lifeboat, began to remember the other half of its heritage, the forgotten part of its name. It wasn't just the Odyssey. It was the Terran Ark ship Odyssey. And the Terrans had not crossed the void unprepared for a welcome like this. The silence that followed Prefect Lyra's ultimatum was heavier than any star. On the bridge of the hegemony flagship, the Vigilance, the 1-hour countdown clock ticked away with metronomic finality. Each second a hammer blow against the anvil of fate. Lyra stood motionless, a statue carved from duty and discipline, her gaze fixed on the image of the Odyssey. The human ark floated in the void with an unnerving placidity, its scars telling a story of survival her sterile, perfect warships could never comprehend. Her officers watched her, their faces tight with a mixture of anticipation and a primal, unglycon emotion she refused to name awe. They were about to engage a vessel powered by a caged god, and no training simulation had ever prepared them for that. She had given the order to open fire the instant the clock reached 0. The first volley would be plasma torpedoes, slow enough to be seen. A final, brutal punctuation to her demand for surrender. If they had shields, this would test them. If they didn't, it would be over. The logic was clean, efficient. It was the hegemony way. Yet, a sliver of doubt, a hairline fracture in her certainty, began to form. Why had they come here? Why this galaxy? This sector? Why reveal themselves with the signal of pure, open intelligence only to be met with annihilation? It felt incomplete. A story missing its final chapter. Aboard the Odyssey, the atmosphere was not one of panic, but of solemn, controlled haste. The bridge was a symphony of quiet commands and soft, glowing consoles. Captain Eva Rostova stood beside the central command throne, her hand resting on its worn armrest, feeling the deep, ancient thrum of her ship waking from its long dream. "The children are awake, Captain," her tactical officer, a grim-faced man named John, reported. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his console. "Geological resonance projectors are online. Mass drivers are recalibrating from asteroid fragmentation to tactical dispersal. The loom is spun." Rostova nodded, her eyes never leaving the closing formation of Glycon ships. The children were not soldiers. They were the tools humanity had built to give life to dead worlds. The resonance projectors were designed to analyze planetary crusts, to find water and minerals deep beneath the surface by sending precise gravitational waves into a planet's core. The mass drivers were for clearing orbital paths, nudging asteroids with focused kinetic force. And the loom, the heart of their terraforming technology, was a network of microdrones that could weave new atmospheres by manipulating electromagnetic fields on a planetary scale. They were tools of creation, but creation and destruction were merely two sides of the same coin, and physics was a brutally impartial god. "They're powering weapons," Gian noted, his display flashing with energy warnings. Rostova's lips thinned. "They call us a variable they cannot control. Let's show them just how variable we can be. Gian, target their lead torpedoes. Don't destroy them. Just unmake them." The clock on the Vigilance Bridge hit 0. "Fire," Lyra commanded, her voice as cold and empty as the space between worlds. A wave of brilliant blue plasma torpedoes erupted from her fleet, streaking toward the silent arc. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. Then, the impossible happened. Space itself seemed to ripple around the incoming torpedoes. There was no counterfire, no energy beams, no explosions. The torpedoes simply stopped. They froze in the void, their plasma containment fields flickering erratically. Then, as if an unseen hand had reached out and squeezed, the space around them warped, not bent, but twisted. The torpedoes folded in on themselves, their brilliant blue energy imploding into pinpricks of silent, white light before vanishing completely. The bridge of the Vigilance was utterly silent. The tactical officer stared at his screen, his mouth agape. "Report!" Lyra snapped, the word cracking the stunned silence like a whip. They didn't fire back, Prefect," the officer stammered. They projected a localized gravitational distortion. They didn't block the torpedoes. They collapsed the space they occupied. All ordnance is gone. All of it. A cold dread, colder than the core of a dead star, began to seep into Lyra's bones. This wasn't technology. It was witchcraft. On the Odyssey, Rostva gave her next command. Now the ships. Target their engine arrays. Don't rupture their cores. Just pull the key from the ignition. Gently. The resonance projectors hummed, sending out focused, invisible waves of gravitational energy. They were not blasts. They were whispers, precisely tuned to the harmonic frequency of the Glycon's hyperfusion reactors. Across the hegemony fleet, alarms blared, one by one. The engines of the 17th Protocol Fleet sputtered and died. Containment fields fluctuated wildly, and main power systems crashed as the delicate balance of their fusion cores was gently, inexorably nudged into a state of safe, inert shutdown. Within 30 seconds, Prefect Lyra's entire fleet of perfect, deadly warships was adrift, powerless, their weapons cold, their crews trapped in floating metal coffins. She watched the Odyssey turn, its massive form eclipsing a distant nebula. It didn't fire a single conventional weapon. It didn't deliver a killing blow. It simply left. It disarmed them as a parent might take a sharp object from a child, with a display of power so absolute it felt less like a battle and more like a lesson. And as the arc accelerated, its impossible singularity drive leaving a faint shimmer in space-time, Lyra knew she had not failed a military engagement. She had failed a test of faith, and her god, the hegemony, would be unforgiving. Meanwhile, on Glycon Prime, Kalen was running. The moment he'd sent the data package, he had initiated a full system purge of his workstation, a standard protocol that would buy him a few precious minutes. But he knew the archive's internal security, the silent wardens, were already moving. They were the ghosts in the machine, the enforcers of information purity, and they would trace the leak back to him with terrifying speed. He didn't run for the exits. That would be suicide. Instead, he ran deeper into the archive, into the older, less traveled sectors, where the data was stored not on crystalline servers, but on ancient, physical media. He moved with a purpose born of years spent exploring these forgotten corridors, his archivist's robes flapping behind him. He knew of a place, a myth within the archive itself, a decommissioned data conduit that, according to legend, led directly to the underlevels of the planetary transport nexus. His only hope was to disappear into the anonymous crush of the capital city. As he ran, the first alerts began to chime on his personal data slate. His access privileges were being revoked. One by one, security doors ahead of him sealed with heavy, metallic thuds. He was being corralled. He slid to a halt before a wall of ancient data spools, his heart pounding. It was a dead end. Then, a panel beside him hissed open. A gaunt figure stood in the shadows of the maintenance corridor. It was Valerius. "You foolish, sentimental child," the Archon hissed, his face a mask of cold fury. "Did you really think you could defy 30 millennia of order? Two silent wardens, clad in featureless gray armor, flanked him." Kalen braced himself for the end, but Valerius didn't give the order to attack. Instead, he held up a data slate. On it was a single, looping image, the Odyssey, effortlessly disabling the protocol fleet. "Your leak," Valerius said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, has become problematic. It has ignited fires we have long sought to keep smothered. The galaxy is watching, and the hegemony cannot be seen to be both tyrants and fools on the same day." He gestured down the dark corridor. "The official story will be that a flaw in our long-range sensors misinterpreted a stellar phenomenon. Prefect Lyra's fleet suffered a cascading systems failure due to a previously unknown form of radiation. The Terran Ark was a phantom, a ghost image caused by the system error." He looked Kalen in the eye, and for the first time, Kalen saw not just disapproval, but a flicker of something akin to fear. "But a ghost needs a ghost hunter. You, Junior Archivist Kalen, have been posthumously decorated for discovering this sensor flaw, saving the fleet from further disaster before tragically succumbing to a coolant leak in this very sector. Your name will be a footnote in a lie that preserves order." Kalen stared, bewildered. "You're letting me go." Valerius's smile was a terrifying thing, thin and bloodless. "Letting you know, I am erasing you. You are now a non-person. The Wardens will not be hunting Kalen the traitor. They will be hunting a nameless, faceless variable. If you are ever found, you will simply cease to exist. There will be no trial, no record. Go. Disappear into the darkness you seem to love so much." He turned and walked away, the Wardens melting back into the shadows. The corridor before Kalen was his only path. Valerius had not saved him. He had merely changed the terms of his execution from a swift, clean end to a slow, hunted fade into nothingness. Across the galaxy, Kalen's data package was spreading like wildfire. On the independent news hub of Relay Station Epsilon, a grizzled infobroker named Zale watched the feeds with a cynical grin. He'd seen empires rise and fall, seen truths manufactured and lies exposed. But this was different. His private channels were screaming. Bootleg copies of the data were being passed through every encrypted network, from the core worlds to the outer fringe. The raw footage of the hegemony's ultimatum, followed by the Odyssey's impossibly peaceful and overwhelmingly powerful response, was a story too perfect to be faked. It painted the hegemony not as the galaxy's calm, orderly shepherd, but as a paranoid, trigger-happy bully. And it painted the humans as something else entirely. Not a myth, not a threat, but a mystery, a legend reborn. "Get me everything you can on the Terran mythos." Zale barked at his assistants. "Cross-reference it with pre-hegemony stellar cartography. Find me the origin point. The hegemony just lost control of the narrative for the first time in 10,000 years. And I want to be the one holding the microphone when the new story gets told." Far away, aboard the drifting Odyssey, Captain Rostova watched the data burst appear on their long-range sensors. It was a massive, chaotic flood of information, but its point of origin was unmistakable Glycon Prime. Within the flood was a perfect copy of their own hails, their peaceful intentions, their story. Someone down there, someone inside the belly of the beast, had tried to help them. "They knew we were coming," she murmured, a sense of wonder mixing with her weariness. Someone remembered. Her mission had been simple: find a safe harbor, a new home for the last of her people. But that mission had just changed. The hegemony had declared them a threat to be erased, and an unknown ally had just declared them a cause to be championed. "Set a course," she said to her navigator, her voice ringing with a newfound purpose. "Follow the trail of that data leak. find its source. Our journey home is over, but our fight for it has just begun. They were no longer just refugees. They were a symbol, a spark, and in the cold, orderly galaxy of the Glycon hegemony, a single spark was all it took to start a fire. The exodus from Glycon Prime was a descent into a world Kalen had only ever read about in censored historical texts. He fled through the maintenance conduit, a cramped, greasy tube that smelled of ozone and lubricant, emerging into the roaring chaos of the planet's transport nexus. The archive had been a world of whispers and muted light. This was a sensory assault. Thousands of beings from 100 different species swarmed through the cavernous station, their bodies a riot of color and form, their voices a cacophony that vibrated in his bones. Hover trains shrieked on magnetic rails. Cargo haulers groaned under the weight of their loads, and the air was thick with the smells of alien food, ionized engine exhaust, and the faint, sweet scent of desperation. For the first time, Kalen felt the sheer, crushing scale of the hegemony, not as a monolithic idea, but as a living, breathing, indifferent organism. He was a single, insignificant cell, and he was being hunted. He shed his archivist robes in a public sanitation unit, trading them for the drab, anonymous coveralls of a void hauler, purchased with the few credits he had on a disposable chip. His face, unremarkable in the cloistered world of Glycon academics, was now his only camouflage. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched, mimicking the weary posture of the laborers and off-worlders around him. Every shadow seemed to hold a silent warden. Every glance from a uniformed enforcer felt like a death sentence. He needed to get off-world, not on a registered passenger liner. His biometrics, even under a low-level flag, would be scanned and cross-referenced in seconds. He needed a ship that asked no questions, a ship that lived in the legal gray areas the hegemony pretended didn't exist. He found it docked in the station's grimiest sector, a place the locals called the Rust Bucket Ring. It was a freighter, the Stardust Drifter, a ship so old and battered it looked like it had been cobbled together from the wreckage of a dozen other vessels. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched alloys, stained with the burns of atmospheric re-entries and the subtle pitting of micrometeoroid impacts. Its captain was a Xylan, a species of hulking, insectoid beings known for their pragmatism and their complete disregard for hegemony shipping regulations. The captain, who introduced himself only as Grask, communicated through a series of clicks and whistles from his complex mandibles, translated by a device on his chest into flat, metallic monotone. Cargo, no questions. Passage to Relay Epsilon. Price is non-negotiable. Kalen didn't haggle. He transferred the last of his credits and was pointed toward a cramped, dark space in the cargo hold, nestled between crates of what smelled like fermented krell worms and humming, vaguely illicit machinery. As the Stardust Drifter shuddered and lifted from its docking cradle, Kalen watched the gleaming spires of Glycon Prime shrink through a grimy porthole, the Grand Archive, a silver needle piercing the clouds. He was adrift, a ghost leaving his own tomb, with no destination beyond survival. Aboard the Odyssey, the hunt for the source of the data leak had become the crew's sole focus. The signal had been cleverly bounced through a series of defunct satellites and deep space relays, a ghost train of data packets designed to be untraceable. But the humans had a tool the hegemony couldn't comprehend. They had a historian, not an archivist who cataloged the past, but a living, breathing historian named Anya Sharma. whose mind was augmented with a direct neural link to the Ark's historical database, a complete, uncensored record of 30 millennia of galactic history, compiled from long-range observation during their journey. While the hegemony's history was a carefully manicured garden, Anya's was a wild, untamed jungle. The leak's final bounce point was Relay Station Epsilon. Anya reported to Captain Rostovus, her eyes unfocused as she navigated the virtual sea of data in her mind. But the routing protocol, the encryption keys, they have a specific signature. They belong to a network known as the Whispering Chain, an info broker collective run by a man named Zale. He operates out of Epsilon. If anyone knows who sent this, it's him. And the hegemony, Rostova asked. They're trying to suppress it, Anya replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. They've issued a system-wide D-notice, classifying all information related to the Outer Veil incident as a threat to galactic stability. They're scrubbing the public networks, but it's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The story is out. The galaxy is buzzing. For the first time in centuries, the hegemony has a rival narrative. Rostova's expression hardened. Then we need to make sure that narrative has a voice. Set a course for Relay Epsilon, but be discreet. The hegemony will be watching every major jump point.
The Odyssey, a ship the size of a small moon, was not built for stealth, but it had the loom.
Jane, the tactical officer, worked with the ship's engineers, weaving a complex illusion. The loom's microdrones were deployed not to create an atmosphere, but to project a precisely calibrated electromagnetic field around the Ark. To any distant hegemony sensor, the Odyssey would not register as a single massive ship, but as a small and unremarkable cluster of asteroids drifting along a natural trajectory. It was slow, painstaking work, but it would allow them to approach the bustling hub of Relay Epsilon undetected. Relay Station Epsilon was the crossroads of the galaxy, a sprawling, chaotic metropolis built into a hollowed-out asteroid. It was a place where fortunes were made, secrets were sold, and empires were quietly undermined. Here, information was the only currency that truly mattered. Zale, the grizzled info broker, sat in his command center, a dimly lit room filled with dozens of holographic displays, each one a river of flowing data. He was watching the hegemony's clumsy attempts to censor the Terran story with the glee of a master puppeteer watching an amateur tangle himself in his own strings. His broadcast, the Epsilon Expos, had become the most watched illegal newsfeed in the galaxy. He had played the footage of the Odyssey's encounter with the 17th Protocol Fleet on a continuous loop, intersplicing it with expert analysis from disgraced hegemony historians and xenosociologists who had been waiting for a moment like this their entire lives. The narrative he was building was powerful. The hegemony, the supposed guardians of peace, had met a peaceful, long-lost race with unprovoked aggression, only to be effortlessly swatted aside like an annoying insect. It was a story of hubris and power, of myth and reality colliding. The hegemony is mobilizing. His chief analyst, a lithe, four-armed Cygnian named Tella, reported. They're dispatching a new fleet, not a protocol fleet this time. This is the Black Spear Fleet, commanded by Prefect Lyra herself. They're moving to secure the Outer Veil, but their trajectory is odd. They're not just securing the area, they're sweeping it, system by system. Zale leaned forward, his single eye narrowing. She's not just securing, she's hunting. They know the Ark is still out there, And Lyra, she has a score to settle. She won't make the same mistake twice. He knew the hegemony would be coming for him, too. An information leak of this magnitude was an act of war, but Zale had survived for decades by always staying one step ahead. His entire operation was mobile. His servers rerouted through quantum-entangled comms that were virtually untraceable. He was a ghost in the machine, and Relay Epsilon was his favorite haunting ground. When the Stardust Drifter finally docked at Epsilon, Kalen felt like a man stepping onto solid ground after years at sea. The station was even more chaotic than Glycon Prime's Nexus, a dizzying vertical city of flashing signs, crowded walkways, and the constant hum of commerce. He disappeared into the crowds, a nameless face among millions. He had the data, the proof, but he had no way to use it. He was a hunted man with a secret that could shatter an empire, but he was alone. He found a cheap data den in the lower levels, a place where patrons could rent an anonymous terminal by the hour. He began to search, cautiously, for any sign that his leak had made an impact. He found Zale's broadcast almost immediately. He watched, mesmerized, as the story he had unleashed was told to the galaxy. He saw the face of the human captain, heard her calm, defiant words. He saw the hegemony's perfect warships rendered helpless. He felt a surge of triumph, quickly followed by a cold wave of terror. He had not just poked the beast, he had wounded its pride. And now, the beast was angry. He knew he had to find Zale. The info broker was the only one who could protect him, the only one who could use the rest of the information. Kalen possessed the deep files on Terran culture, philosophy, their history of fighting for ideals the hegemony couldn't even comprehend. He sent a single, carefully encrypted message to the public address for the Epsilon Expos. I am the ghost from the machine. I have the source code for your story. We need to talk. Miles above him, in the silent, star-dusted void, the Odyssey settled into a high orbit, its asteroid camouflage holding steady. Anya's sensors picked up the message almost instantly. The encryption was a variant of the same code used in the original data leak. "Captain," she said, her voice taut with excitement. "It's him, our ghost. He's here, on the station." Eva Rostova stood, her decision made in a heartbeat. We can't risk docking. We can't risk a direct transmission they might trace. Send a team. In secret, find him. Bring him to us. The mission was impossibly dangerous. A small shuttle, disguised as a common asteroid mining prospector, would have to detach from the Odyssey, navigate the station's dense traffic, and land without raising suspicion. A small, elite team, composed of crew members who could pass for common galactic citizens, would go in. Among them was Jian, his tactical mind seeing the station not as a city, but as a battlefield of sightlines and choke points. Their objective: find a ghost in a city of millions, a man hunted by the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and bring him aboard a ship that officially didn't exist. As the shuttle detached and began its silent descent toward the glowing jewel of Relay Epsilon, Prefect Lyra, aboard her new flagship, the Iron Shroud, gave a new order. The Black Spear Fleet was not just hunting the Ark. They were hunting a narrative. All intelligence assets, she commanded, her voice resonating with cold, renewed purpose, are to focus on Relay Station Epsilon. The source of this seditious broadcast will be found. The leak will be sealed permanently. The hunt was on. And all the players the hunted archivist, the refugee captain, the cynical info broker, and the vengeful prefect were converging on a single point of light in the unending darkness. The data den in the lower levels of Relay Epsilon was a grimy microcosm of the station itself, a place of transient identities and desperate transactions. Kalen sat in a flickering holographic booth, the air thick with the metallic tang of overloaded processors and the faint, spicy aroma of some alien narcotic. He had sent his message into the electronic void, and now all he could do was wait. Every nerve ending screaming. He felt exposed, a snail ripped from its shell. The anonymous crowds that had felt like a shield now seemed menacing, each passerby a potential warden. He replayed the events of the past days in his mind, a dizzying spiral of forbidden data, a cold-faced Archon, and a desperate flight into the unknown. He was no hero, no revolutionary. He was an archivist, a man of quiet contemplation who had stumbled upon a truth so profound it had burned his old life to ash. He didn't know if his message to Zale would be seen as a plea for help or the ramblings of a lunatic. Zale, in his data haven high above, saw it as neither. He saw it as an opportunity wrapped in a puzzle. The message from the Ghost was a wild card in a game that was escalating faster than he had ever anticipated. The hegemony was moving, their Black Spear fleet a dagger pointed at the heart of his operation. Publicly, he scoffed at their attempts at censorship. Privately, he was already laying the groundwork for a full-scale digital evacuation. But this Ghost, if he was genuine, if he was the original source of the leak, he was the single most valuable intelligence asset in the galaxy. He held the key to the human story, the context that could turn a simple act of defiance into a galactic movement. Zale typed a reply, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. The message was short, cryptic, designed to be understood only by the sender. The old star charts are flawed. Meet me where the twin suns of Cygnus set behind the old observatory. Come alone. There was no old observatory on Relay Epsilon, but in the Glycon archive, Sector Gamma 9, there was a famous astrogation chart, a pre-hegemony relic depicting the Cygnus system. It was a test. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the archive would understand the reference. Kalen's heart leaped as the reply materialized in his booth. The Cygnus chart. He knew it instantly. It was a masterpiece of ancient cartography, famous for a small hurry. Artistic flourish. In the corner, a depiction of a cantina called the Twin Suns. It was a real place. A dive bar in Epsilon's merchant district, known as a neutral ground for information exchange. Zale was real, and he was willing to meet. Kalen wiped his terminal and slipped out of the den, pulling the hood of his coveralls low over his head. The merchant district was a sensory overload, a vibrant, chaotic maze of open-air markets and shadowy alleyways. Beings of every conceivable shape hawked wares that ranged from exotic fruits that sang when touched to gleaming, obviously stolen pieces of hegemony technology. He found the Twin Suns tucked away in a narrow side street, its entrance marked by a buzzing neon sign depicting two crudely drawn stars. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from a dozen different alien species, and the low thrum of a bass-heavy alien melody pulsed from hidden speakers. He scanned the room, his eyes darting between booths filled with grizzled pilots, shifty-eyed traders, and at least one hegemony enforcer trying, and failing, to look inconspicuous. Meanwhile, Gene and his small team had landed. Their shuttle, registered under a false ID, as the prospecting ship Lucky Find, now sat silently in a crowded, low-security docking bay, dressed in the same nondescript work gear as Kalen. They blended into the station's blue-collar workforce. Jian's mind was a whirlwind of tactical calculations. He had Kalen's physical description, pulled from the Glycon archive records their ghost had so thoughtfully provided. He also had the cryptic message Zale had sent. Anya's analysis had pinpointed the location of the twin suns within minutes. "He'll be watched," Jian said to his team through their encrypted comms. "Zale is a big target. The hegemony will have assets all over that district. We move in pairs. Non-lethal force only. Our priority is the archivist. We get him out clean." They split up, melting into the crowds. Their movements economical and precise. They were ghosts of a different kind, trained to navigate the shadows, not of data, but of life and death. As Kalen waited in the cantina, trying to make a single glass of murky synthale last, a figure slid into the booth opposite him. It was Zale. He was smaller in person than his broadcasts suggested, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and old scars. But his single eye was sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. "You're either very brave or very stupid to show your face here, kid," Zale said, his voice a low rasp. "The hegemony has put a black flag bounty on the source of the leak. Every bounty hunter from here to the core is looking for you." "I have more information," Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper, "about the humans, their culture, their history. The hegemony's official record is a lie. They weren't savages. They were artists, philosophers, warriors." Zale leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Go on." As Kalen began to speak, detailing the fragments of poems, the elegant scientific principles, the deep-seated cultural belief in individual liberty he had found in the corrupted files, Jian's team was closing in. Two of them had taken up positions on a walkway overlooking the cantina's entrance. Jian himself was moving through the market, his path an indirect spiral toward his target. He spotted the hegemony assets immediately. They were too clean, too alert. One was the enforcer inside the cantina. Two more were posing as merchants in the street outside, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds. This was a trap, but not for Kalen. It was for Zale. Prefect Lyra, aboard the Iron Shroud in high orbit, watched a different set of screens. Her intelligence operatives on Epsilon had intercepted the message to the Ghost. They didn't know his identity, but they knew he was meeting Zale. Her orders were precise. "Do not engage Zale directly," she commanded her team leader on the station. "Use him as bait. Your target is the leaker. He is the weak link. Apprehend him. Silently. I want him alive. I want to know everything he knows." She was learning from her mistakes. Brute force had failed against the humans. Now, she would use subtlety. She would dismantle their nascent legend by capturing and discrediting its source. Inside, the twin suns. Zale listened intently, his cynical exterior slowly cracking as Kalen spoke. The picture Kalen painted of the Terrans was not of a race, but of an idea of resilience, of fierce independence, of a people who would rather burn their own world than live under tyranny. "This," Zale murmured, his mind racing. "This changes everything. This isn't just a story about the hegemony being bullies. This is a story about hope." But as he spoke, his practiced eye caught a flicker of movement outside the cantina window. a reflection in the polished chrome of a vendor's stall, a man in a merchant's robe holding his hand to his ear, an earpiece, a professional. "We've been made," Zale hissed, his demeanor changing in an instant from intrigued journalist to cornered animal. He slammed a credit chip on the table. "Time to go. Stick with me if you want to live." He stood and moved toward the back of the cantina, not with panic, but with a fluid, practiced urgency. Kalen, startled, followed close behind. The enforcer inside the cantina moved to intercept them. But a sudden, violent bar fight erupted out of nowhere, two burly asteroid miners suddenly deciding they had an ancient grudge, and the enforcer was swallowed by the chaos. It was Gian's team, creating a diversion. Outside, as Zale and Kalen emerged into a back alley, the two hegemony merchants closed in. But before they could act, a heavy cargo container, seemingly dislodged from an overhead crane, plummeted down, blocking the alley entrance with a deafening crash. Another diversion. "Who the hell are your friends?" Zale grunted as they ran. "I don't have any friends." Kalen panted, utterly bewildered. They were being herded. A voice, calm and clear, echoed in Kalen's ear, seemingly from nowhere. It was a micro-vocalizer, a pin-sized device that had been discreetly attached to his collar during a staged bump in the crowd. "Archivist Kalen," the voice said. "My name is Gian. We mean you no harm. We are with the Odyssey. Captain Rostova wants to meet you. Turn left at the next intersection. Move now." Kalen froze, his mind struggling to process the words. The Odyssey. The humans. They were here. For him. Trusting the unseen voice was an insane leap of faith, but the alternative was capture by the hegemony. He grabbed Zale's arm. "This way," he said, pulling the surprised info broker to the left. They plunged into the station's labyrinthine maintenance tunnels, guided by Gian's calm, precise instructions. Behind them, they could hear the shouts of the frustrated hegemony agents. On the bridge of the Iron Shroud, Lyra watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. Her targets were gone, vanished from her sensors. "They had help," her station commander reported, his voice tight with failure. "Professionals. Highly coordinated. We don't know who they are." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. It was the humans. It had to be. They weren't just running. They were fighting back, not with weapons of impossible physics, but with espionage and precision. They were adapting, learning her methods, and turning them against her. The humiliation she'd felt in the outer veil was nothing compared to the cold, burning fury she felt now. "Lock down the station," she commanded. "Scan every ship. No one leaves. Find them." But it was too late. Gian's team led Kalen and a reluctant, grumbling Zeal to their disguised shuttle. Moments later, the lucky find lifted off, its transponder code flagging it as just another rock hauler leaving the station. It rose into the void, a tiny spark of light against the glittering sprawl of Relay Epsilon, and was silently swallowed by the shadow of a passing asteroid, the Odyssey. As Kalen stepped onto the bridge of the human arc, the universe seemed to tilt on its axis. The ghosts he had chased through corrupted data files were real. He stood before Captain Eva Rostova, a woman whose face he had only seen on a news broadcast, a legend made flesh. "Welcome aboard the Odyssey, Archivist Kalen," Rostova said, her voice warm, but her eyes holding the ancient. weary weight of her people's long journey. It seems we have a story to finish. The bridge of the Odyssey was a cathedral of silent, sleeping power. It was nothing like the cramped, utilitarian control rooms of hegemony warships. The view screen was a vast, seamless curve of armored transparency that looked out upon the star-dusted velvet of space. Relay Epsilon, a receding diamond of light. The air was clean, tinged with the faint, organic scent of hydroponics, and the low hum of the ship was more a feeling in the bones than a sound. Kalen stood beside the command throne, a simple archivist caught in the gravitational pull of a living myth. He had expected soldiers, hardened and grim, but the humans of the bridge crew moved with a quiet, focused grace. They were weary, their faces etched with the lines of a journey that spanned millennia, but their eyes held a fierce, unyielding light. Zale, ever the pragmatist, was already assessing the situation, his single eye darting from the impossible technology of the consoles to the calm, disciplined demeanor of the crew. He was a man who traded in secrets, and he had just stumbled into the vault. "Your leak saved us, Kalen," Captain Rostova said, her voice cutting through his awe. "You gave us a fighting chance when we thought we had none. But you also started a war." She gestured to a holographic display that bloomed in the center of the bridge. It showed a map of the galaxy, crisscrossed with the red vectors of the Black Spear Fleet. Relay Epsilon was now a fortress, locked down under Prefect Lyra's command. "Lyra is not a fool," Rostova continued. "She knows we were there. She knows we have you. She won't rest until she has silenced the story you started." "She can't silence it," Zale interjected, stepping forward. "It's already out. The hegemony's authority is based on the illusion of absolute control and unerring wisdom. You've shattered that illusion. Planets in the outer fringe are already citing your example, refusing hegemony directives. The whispering chain is ablaze with seditious chatter. You haven't just started a war, you've started a revolution." Rostova's gaze was steady. "A revolution needs more than a story. It needs a symbol. It needs a victory." She turned to Kalen. "The information you carry, the truth about our past, it is the most powerful weapon we have. The hegemony has spent 30,000 years convincing the galaxy that they are the only viable path to order, that any alternative leads to chaos and self-destruction. You know that is a lie." Kalen found his voice, the timid archivist giving way to the man who had risked everything for a forgotten truth. "They erased you," he said, his voice trembling with a long-suppressed indignation. "They erased hundreds of species, hundreds of philosophies. They pruned the galaxy like a bonsai tree, cutting away anything that didn't fit their perfect, sterile design. Your history proves that another way is possible." "Then we must show them," Rostova declared, a fire igniting in her eyes. She turned to her command staff. "Anya, the hegemony's greatest strength is its centralized control. Where is its heart?" Anya Sharma, the ship's historian, closed her eyes, her mind diving into the sea of data. "Glycon Prime," she answered after a moment. "Specifically, the Grand Archive. It's more than a library. It's the central nervous system of their empire. All fleet commands, all economic data, all historical records are routed through its core processors. It is the source of their truth, the heart of their lie. A plan, audacious and seemingly impossible, began to form on the bridge of the Odyssey. They would not run. They would not hide. They would take the fight to the enemy's heart. They would go back to Glycon Prime. On the Iron Shroud, Prefect Lyra was waging a different kind of war. Her ships blockaded Epsilon, her agents tearing the station apart in their hunt for the fugitives. But she was fighting shadows. Zale's networks had gone dark, and the Ark had vanished into the void. She was left with a wounded pride and a galaxy that was beginning to question. Her reports to the Hegemony High Command were met with cold, clipped demands for results. The stability of the Empire was fracturing, and she was being held responsible. The shame of her defeat in the Outer Veil had been a private wound. This was a public humiliation. Her fury coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. She analyzed the Ark's previous actions, searching for a pattern. They were not conquerors. They were strategists. They struck at symbols, at ideas. They had disabled her fleet to make a point. They had leaked the data to change the narrative. What was the ultimate symbol of hegemony power? The answer came to her with the chilling certainty of a funeral bell, the Grand Archive. She was a hunter, and she finally knew where her prey was going. Set a course for Glycon Prime. She commanded, her voice like cracking ice. All ships, maximum speed. They are going home. The journey to the heart of the Empire was a tense, silent passage through the dark. The Odyssey used its loom not as a cloak, but as a key, projecting false energy signatures, mimicking the transponder codes of cargo freighters and diplomatic couriers, slipping through the hegemony sensor nets like a phantom. Kalen worked tirelessly with Anya, weaving his intimate knowledge of the archive systems with her vast historical database. They were not planning a brute force assault. They were planning a digital coup. The goal was not to destroy the archive, but to liberate it, to unlock the thousands of censored file, to restore the histories of the erased species, to replace the hegemony's singular, sterile truth with the messy, vibrant, and chaotic chorus of the real galaxy. It was a plan that could only have been conceived by an archivist and a historian. Meanwhile, Gian and Zale worked on a different problem broadcasting their victory. Zale, using the Ark's powerful comms array, re-established contact with the Whispering Chain, preparing them for the single biggest data burst in galactic history. "If we pull this off," Zale said with a wolfish grin, "the hegemony won't just be wounded. It will be lobotomized in front of a live, galaxy-wide audience." As the Odyssey emerged from its final, silent jump into orbit around the pristine, cloud-swirled world of Glycon Prime, they found the Black Spear fleet waiting for them. Lyra had anticipated their move. A wall of gray warships stood between them and the planet, a line of death drawn across the stars. "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. Prefect Lyra's face appeared on the main screen, her expression as unyielding as the armored hull of her flagship. "Captain Rostova, your journey ends here. Surrender now, and I will be merciful. Your crew will be imprisoned, your technology studied, but your people will be allowed to live." Eva Rostova stood before the screen, the weight of her 50,000-year-old promise to her people settling on her shoulders. "Prefect Lyra," she replied, her voice calm and resonant. "You speak of mercy, but you offer only a cage. We did not cross the void between galaxies to live in a cage. We came home to be free." "There is no freedom without order," Lyra countered, her voice tight with conviction. "You are an agent of chaos. You will be contained." "The only chaos I see," Rostova said, "is the fear in the heart of an empire. that has forgotten what it means to be alive. She turned from the screen. Jian, it's time to show them what a terraforming ship can really do. The battle that followed was not a clash of weapons, but a duel of philosophies. The Black Spear fleet unleashed a storm of plasma in kinetic rounds, a display of overwhelming, conventional force. But the Odyssey did not fire back. Instead, the resonance projectors sang their silent, gravitational song. They did not target the ship's engines this time. They targeted the space between the ships. Localized gravitational fields warped and buckled, sending hegemony cruisers careening into one another. Their precise formations shattered into a chaotic scrum. Torpedoes found their paths bent, spiraling harmlessly into the void, or, in a moment of sublime irony, curving back to strike the ships that had fired them. While Jian conducted his symphony of chaos in orbit, Anya and Kalen launched their own assault. They opened a channel directly to the archive, not with a signal, but with the prime number sequence, the simple mathematical key the humans had first used. It was an intellectual key, not a military one. Inside the archive, Archon Valerius watched in horror as his systems registered the incoming signal not as an attack, but as a high-priority data transfer from a pre-collapsed source. His own protocols, the ancient rules of the archive he had dedicated his life to upholding, demanded that he accept it. The data stream was not a virus. It was a truth bomb. Kalen, using his knowledge of the archive's deepest structures, guided the flood of uncensored histories, the restored poems, the forbidden sciences, directly into the core processors, on every public terminal on Glycon Prime, and on every screen connected to Zale's pirate network across the galaxy. The hegemony's lies began to unravel. The history of the Terrans, their art, their philosophy, their desperate last stand against a tyrannical empire in their own galaxy, flooded the networks. Then came the histories of the others, the lyrical, silicon-based life forms of Cygnus X-1, the telepathic dream weavers of the Orion Nebula, the stoic engineers of the Andromeda Dwarf Galaxy, all the vibrant, unique cultures the hegemony had classified as unstable variables and scrubbed from the record. The archive, the very heart of the hegemony, was broadcasting the truth of its own crimes to the entire galaxy. In the chaos of the orbital battle, Lyra watched her fleet being dismantled by an enemy that refused to fight on her terms. On her command console, she saw the data flood pouring from the archive, the foundation of her entire worldview dissolving into lies. She had dedicated her life to an idea of order, but that order was built on a graveyard. The Odyssey moved past her crippled fleet, its passage unhindered, and took up a geostationary orbit directly above the Grand Archive, a silent, patient guardian. It had not fired a single lethal shot. It had won not by destroying its enemy, but by forcing it to look in the mirror. Lyra stared at the image of the Ark, no longer seeing an enemy, but a catalyst, a force of change as inevitable as a supernova. Her comms channel opened. It was Rostova. "It's over, Prefect," the human captain said, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a deep, resonant weariness. "What you do next will determine the future of this galaxy." Lyra looked at her tactical display, at the fire control solutions still locked on the Ark. She could give the order. She could still destroy them, perhaps even at the cost of her own fleet. But she would only be destroying a ship. The idea, the truth, was already free. With a slow, deliberate motion, She closed the channel and broadcast a single command to her remaining ships: stand down. The age of the hegemony did not end with a bang, but with a whisper, the whisper of a million forgotten stories being told once more. In the aftermath, the galaxy began to change. The hegemony, its moral authority shattered, fractured into a dozen different factions. Some clung to the old ways, but many more, inspired by the humans' return and the rediscovery of their own lost histories, began to forge new paths. The Odyssey did not become a conqueror or a ruler. It became a beacon. Kalen, the timid archivist, became the first curator of a new, open archive dedicated to preserving every story, no matter how small or strange. Zale, to his own surprise, became a respected journalist. His Epsilon Expos, the most trusted news source in the newly chaotic but vibrant galaxy. And Ava Rostova, captain of the last human ark, finally led her people home, not to the lost soil of Earth, but to a new beginning, a promise of a future where no one would ever be erased again. They had crossed the dark, not just to survive, but to remind a forgetful galaxy of a simple, powerful truth that a single story, honestly told, can be more powerful than 1,000 warships.